Man, finally.
Hello, Mert. Sorry it took me so long. How are you, man?
Finally, you made it.
Yeah, sorry. We had some technical difficulties on this, and the internet in the studio is a little wonky today. But great to be here. How's the connection?
It's all cool, mate. What's up with you?
All good. Just getting in the studio, about to get ready to light some stuff up. It's sort of a quiet day outside in New York City, as it's been for the last several months. It's starting to get cold too. It was snowing yesterday, so we're here in full winter in New York City.
So while you are trying to connect, I give a brief information about you to the people that are listening to us.
Sure.
And I told them you are the partner of tribal house legend John Creamer, because John Creamer is really big in Turkey. Everyone knows him. Actually, in the world, everyone knows him. Can you tell us how you met him and how it started?
Yeah, sure.
That Up All Night track.
Yeah,
Up All Night thing.
Sure. That's a great story. So I used to play a party every month called Clash in New York City that was run by my good friend Russ John Gold, and Russ Gold from Stay Gold. He invited me to play this party for a few months in a row, and one day I see that my name is next to John Creamer in the flyer, and I'm like, holy shit, I'm going to be playing with John Creamer. So, you know, I get his number from John, and I'm texting him, you know, hey man, you know, look forward to, you know, to playing with you next month, you know, hey man, you know, look forward to playing with you in a couple weeks, you know, 1 week away. I'm like, hey man, I look forward to playing with you, you know, next week. And then that night, you know, that, hey John, looking forward to tonight, you know, and then the gig started. It was like, hey man, where are you? About 2 hours of the gig, we're like, you coming or what? So that was my first meeting with John was really a non-meeting. So I ended up playing that gig with Russ, and we had a lot of fun. But you know, after that, I really made it a mission to try to track him down and meet him. So you know, I'd call him, leave messages. You know, told him I wanted to work. He used to have a restaurant in the East Village on East 3rd Street, and I would go to the restaurant and I would leave notes for him. So finally one day, I corner him, you know, at a bit of a party, and you know, he was like, look man, you know, if we're gonna work, you know, it's fine that you're motivated and ambitious, but if we're gonna work, we got to be friends. You know, it's just like, it's not so easy that, you know, you could come and corner me and we can, you know, go to the studio together. And I was like, all right, fine, fair enough. So we ended up, you know, hanging out. I think the next day or 2 days later, I was like, hey man, what are you doing today? What are you doing today? We ended up hanging out maybe a few times a week for probably about 6 months before we got in the studio for the first time. And that was about 2 years ago. 2 years ago this week, about, right? Within the next couple of weeks, it's the 2-year anniversary of us first getting into the studio. And the very first thing that we did together was Guava, our remix of the Tunnel Visions. And that was such magic that, you know, we figured that we were onto something. So we just kept at it ever since.
You know what? I'm playing, actually, I'm doing radio show for FT. It's like for 16 years.
Okay.
Right. Without any interruption. And you know what? The first time I wasn't playing FG, and I was talking with John because of my production and because of the remix I did for So Get Up and other stuff. And he really supported my tracks and my music. And he invited me to FG's party. And when I get into the club, he took me to the DJ booth, and this event ended up that I'm playing in FG. It's like 16 years.
There we go.
When he took my hand from the DJ booth and he said, come, and he was playing with Stefan, and when I go to DJ booth, owner of the radio told me, why aren't you playing in our radio? This is how my FG story started.
Okay, that's an
So
incredible story.
I will respect John all the way.
There we go. That's an incredible story. And yeah, and I understand that he was on with you here a couple weeks back. And yeah, thanks again for having me. It's definitely great to be here, Mert. And sorry I was a little bit late earlier.
He is a proper real deal, I think.
There we go. Yeah, John is the real deal, and he's absolutely he's an incredible communicator too. One of the most amazing things about John, and everybody who knows him knows, that he can say with very few words, you know, a lot of information that has sort of these cascades of meanings. So, you know, the feedback that John gives on music, the hot takes that he has on what he hears, it's truly inspirational, right? You know, the first time that you start talking to him, that you hear him sort of like, go into music or go into what he feels about certain things. You can't help but to realize, you know, the impact and the wisdom sort of the layers that are in some of those statements. It's really impressive, for sure.
The thing is, I thought same thing to John as well. In these days, or for example, in year 2000, people are all talking about, maybe you know too, tribal progressive house music. Everyone is talking about it, and everyone is trying to do it, because Sasha Indigwit is playing it in the Twilo in New York, and everyone is trying to do the actually carbon copy the same thing. The deal is, in these days, they're still doing the same music, but the genre has changed. They are now calling it Afro house music. In fact, it's the same tribal house music. If you go back, and I told him to John, and he said, yes, you are right. It's the same music they are doing in 90s. It's the same music, exactly the same music they are doing in, David, John Kramer, or David Morales. Doing in New York, it's the same music, but the name is changing.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think a few things have evolved in music, but beyond the name. But that tribal sound, I couldn't agree with you more. When I started coming up in the New York clubs in the 90s, going out, yeah, all you heard was tribal house. That was the sound of New York nightclubs. When you went to raves, there was an East Coast techno sound that existed in the 90s, but that was sort of shared. You could go to Boston or Philadelphia or Washington or, Baltimore or anywhere on the East Coast, and hear the same East Coast rave sound. But this New York club sound really belonged to New York. And sure, some of these artists got big and some of the music got popular elsewhere. But really, tribal house was sort of very regional, and it was very New York. Now, fast forward over time, and I feel that the tools have gotten more democratized. In the 90s, to make a record, you needed a huge studio filled with equipment, right? And now, basically, you need, a laptop, a good sound card, and some technical know-how. And I think that, as the tools get more and more democratized, surprise, surprise, the best tribal music comes from Africa. So I guess they're branding it sort of Afro house, even though when you think about it, a lot of the artists are still in the same places, right? Portugal, Spain, Italy, and now Africa.
Yes,
so I feel that where the music is being made has certainly evolved. And I think that the democratization of tools and the music itself has certainly evolved. But it's very interesting how to me, it started in the clubs of New York City, and now, surprise, surprise, it's sort of owned and belongs to Africa. So it's an interesting progression, without a doubt.
Yes, definitely, definitely. You know what? Uh, when I started making music, it's very, it's very interesting story. When I started making music in Turkey, uh, the music, house music, is totally different to the people. It's nothing they are familiar with.
Okay.
And the problem is, when I started doing it, many people think that this electronic music is for drugs. So we have to get rid of it somehow. Uh, but when the time passes, uh, very strange thing happens. One of my friends, the very famous reporter in a very famous newspaper in Turkey, went to New York and stayed there like a month or something. When he went to a record shop, he saw my records. The funny thing is, the record sellers, when I started making music with tribal house. I'm still doing the tribal house.
Sure.
I'm a proper tribal guy, and I love the tribal music. The thing is, shopkeeper or the owner of the shop said, he knows more things about the proper Turkish people about me. The thing is, in the 2002, 2003 or 4, I was more famous in New York than in Istanbul.
Okay.
Isn't it very funny?
Yeah, you know, and it's
there,
interesting
there is
that
a moment. There is a moment in 2003 and in 2004, in the same years. I wasn't playing in my home city, but every week another country, another
sure.
city.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting that the internet has absolutely helped that, I think, too, right? Like, I think that, you know, you're certainly seeing that, I guess, with a bunch of artists here in New York that I know that seem to be playing New York every so often, but really their impetus is to go and travel. And at the same time, you know, like to take an example from the 90s, I feel that Sasha and Digweed became famous everywhere because they were playing in New York in Twilo. And I don't necessarily think that they had that kind of fame or recognition back in the UK in any city, you know, really until they came here and started rocking Twilo once a month and really developing a huge, a voracious, you know, fan base and following that I think propelled them to world stardom, right? So there certainly is, you know, sort of that idea that in electronic music, people don't get famous in their hometown. But I guess you're another example of that too then, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, let's go to another subject. And in these days, you and John got a nomination from Grammys. Let's talk about it. How does it happen, and what's the details?
Sure. Well, to be clear, it wasn't a nomination. It was a consideration. So there's a few different categories from my understanding, and we were on a short list to be considered for a nomination for Best Original Dance Recording for Silent Praise with Janadu, as well as for Best Remix Recording for our work on Roland Clark and Francis Mercier's Heart of Mine. And then separately, Kevin Yost was also in a consideration list for the remix category for his remix of our song Silent Praise. So, you know, there were three different considerations that we had that we were shortlisted for that the Recording Academy let us know about. Look, it was just a truly unexpected thing to be considered for that, you know. And when I saw that, I was absolutely beside myself. Now, the way the process works, my understanding is that there's several rounds of voting. And so you go from, a short list to nominations to the award winner. So we didn't make the next rounds of voting with those tracks. Looking forward to next year on that one, but just merely to be considered. That was something else. That was really incredible.
Bro, even being considered for Grammys, it's beyond something.
Oh yeah. Oh, I remember getting that message, and I had just woken up, and I'm sitting on the edge of my bed and I'm reading my emails, and I saw that email that came in from our management, and yeah, and I did cry. It's funny, when I was a kid, I always used to make fun of the people that cried at award shows, right? And I remember sitting and watching, actors accept awards at the Academy Awards and start crying, and I would laugh, but now I completely understand, that level of emotion, that level of intensity, to have something recognized, on that level is certainly extraordinarily humbling.
You know what? Even myself, when you or John shared that Grammy thing with me, I can't even believe my eyes. It's like, I need to see this.
Yeah.
Proper thing. It's the...
Yeah, I couldn't either. I mean, I got very emotional. I'm not gonna lie. The tears were welling up, and I mean, the first person that I told, I think, was my mom. So I was certainly, beaming with pride as I was, sharing this with people. It was a truly humbling, experience. I never in a million years thought I would have seen that. Certainly not this year.
So next thing, for the gigs this time, what do you use for producing music? What's your favorite plugins? What's your favorite gears? Classic studio gig time right now.
Okay.
And tell us about your favorites, man.
Okay. Well, the studio has definitely evolved over time. And it's certainly even evolved over the time that I was at Up All Night. So we happen to be in my studio right now. So as I'm turning my head and looking around, because I'm turning on some equipment, so maybe I can sort of go around the room and show it to you if you guys are into that. If there's a lot of studio nerds watching and you guys are into the gear, I could certainly take us through it a little bit, without a doubt.
Studio nerds.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the way that I break up, the way that I look at equipment, the only thing that's really needed, right, to make a record, I think, is a computer, right, and a decent sound card and some knowledge in terms of, how to arrange, how to do some sound design, etc. That said, that's always needed, I think. And I'm just going to say this straight off, and anybody that tells you anything different is lying or trying to sell you something, right? All you need is a computer and a sound card. That said, I think... You know
what? Sorry about interrupting you.
Yeah, sure.
This is my first record. It's like... let me show you.
There we go. Classic right there.
Underground Sound of Lisbon, So Get Up's. It's my remix. I released in 2002, and I did it the cheapest sound card available and the cheapest computer available.
And you got on one of the hottest record labels available. Right? Yeah.
It's Tribal America.
Yeah, there you go. So I've always thought that, and you can add from there, right? And I think that the thing that is most difficult to reproduce using just a computer and a sound card is the sound of instruments, right?
Yes.
So
definitely.
So tone to me is sort of what the investment is outside of the computer and the sound card. There's a lot of folks that invest in processing, right? Processors, compressors, right? Preamps and other types of outboard gear. To me, I feel that this computers do very well, right? That although a lot of people, really swear by the sound of something like, like an LA2A compressor or an 1176, the truth is that in a mix and even to trained ears with good, with good processing within the computer, I think that, that sound can be approximated, if not really nailed, and between emulations from companies like maybe I shouldn't even mention these names because they're not paying me, but people like Native Instruments, people like Slate Digital, even Waves has, decent, emulations in the setting, UAD obviously, has very decent emulations of those gears. And I don't think it's sort of necessary to invest in sound processing. That said, tone generation is something that's different, right? Now, I just moved in the studio a little bit ago, so my guitars and my basses, are not yet hanging on the wall, and I definitely have some drums around. So there's absolutely that level of acoustic instruments that the computers will never, ever, ever be able to reproduce. But you also have things like the sound of electricity, like analog instruments. So personally, I think that an analog polysynth and an analog monosynth are probably the first tone generation pieces to get outside of a computer and a sound card. And I do love the sound of digital, and I definitely have quite a few digital synthesizers here, or a few digital synthesizers here, a few hybrid synthesizers here. I think that analog is the most difficult thing to replicate, the most unique thing outside of the box, I think, to start with. So, for me, the most important part of kit: computer, sound card, analog monosynth, analog polysynth. Of course, your monitors also help. You have to be able to hear what you're doing. And for that, I've always thought that 8 inches or better. It doesn't really matter how much you spend on a monitor, so long as the physics of it mean that you can hear the bass.
Personally, what I think is know your monitor well.
Yeah, precisely.
If you are familiar with it, you can do anything with it.
That's right. Or the combination of the monitor and the room, right? Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I could not agree more. I think that that's 100% correct. And I do think that it's important to work 8 inches or larger so you can actually hear the bass, but so long as you have a frequency response that's, 50-ish, 40-ish to 20K-ish, so long as you can hear things, you'll be able to get used to it. You'll be able to make great music.
And what I say to my junior people, junior producers, newcomers, what I say is, if you produce music, you produce something.
Okay.
You wrote a track. Don't mess with mastering it. It's a different art.
Oh yeah,
It's
for sure.
Thing.
Absolutely. When recording started as a discipline, these were literally different jobs, right? Back in the old days when guys used to wear a suit and tie into the studio, there was a recording engineer, right? And that engineer would specialize in recording instrumentalists, right? There were mixing engineers that would specialize in, amalgamating a multi-track recording, right? And getting it to sound right. And then there were folks as mastering engineers, completely different and separate from those that were doing mixing and those that were doing recording. Mastering is a discipline that's completely separate. Yeah, I would say that just getting into music, and look, I don't know anything about mastering. To be completely honest, that's something that I have completely set aside. When I make my own tracks and when we're picking up all night tracks, and when we want to listen to them in the club or listen to them on another system, we approximate a mastering process. So we know enough about it to be dangerous or to be able to approximate what a mastered sound would be. But we in no ways, would consider ourselves mastering engineers. I'm in no way a mastering engineer. I do not master. I don't do mastering. To be able to hear my things in the club, to be able to help friends so that they can hear their things in the club, that's one thing. But as actual mastering engineers, to be able to ready a recording for broadcast and playback, that's a discipline that's just completely separate. Yeah.
You know what? Music writing is like riding a horse, and mastering it's like feeding the horse. The rider
Huh.
has no idea how to feed the horse.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's I think that music production is more like breeding the horse, right? And I think mastering is more like showing the horse. Like, we'll create the horse, but
Maybe,
they'll brush it and put the shoe on it and clean the teeth
but you got what I tried to mean, you know.
I'm sorry?
But you get what I tried to say,
Yeah, oh, yeah,
you know.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I like the
It's
metaphor.
totally different things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a lot of places to take to take that, but the bottom line is in any metaphor, you're creating a product versus making that product ready for a shelf, right? And that's and that's something that's just completely discrete, one to the other. I completely agree.
The deal is, if you spend your time, your creative time, for example, Noam Rubinstein writing a new track, if he spends that precious time on trying to make a track, he loses that creativity in in that time period, you know.
Huh, interesting.
Uh,
So what you're saying is that when you concentrate, on
yeah, what I say is, you don't have to lose your creative time. Yeah, it's a little bit frozen. Welcome
sorry
back.
about that.
Welcome back.
Yeah, sorry, I guess my internet had other ideas about me staying in. Is the connection okay now?
It seems like fine right now.
Perfect.
The thing is, we were talking about the geek stuff and what you are. For example, many people talking about. I've been asked this question. It's like 100 times. Actually, I know the answer, but I want viewers to know the same answer from a famous producer like you too. Uh, what digital audio workstation do you use?
Okay.
And
Okay.
do you think there is a difference between, not difference, audio quality difference between DAWs?
That's a great question.
Actually, I know the answer, but I just people to know about the.
Yeah. So different there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So different digital workstations are going to have a different sound depending on how they sum and whether it's sample accurate or not. So most digital audio workstations will produce a similar sounding, output. As far as working in high quality, so long as a digital audio workstation is capable of sample accurate playback, you're fine. Like you can absolutely make great sounding records. And I know what you use, Mert. You can make great sounding records on, I use Ableton Live. You can make great records on Logic. I used to use that. I learned.
I'm using FL Studio.
Yeah, exactly. And with sample accurate playback, it's you can
Yeah.
have anything that will sound. And that's going to be the difference in between your Ableton Lives and your Logics, right? Is basically how or FL Studio, is how things sort of sound together, if that makes sense. I think that it's very difficult as a listener to know what digital audio workstation was used in a recording.
What I think is impossible.
Yeah, yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah. There was a time where it was not. There was a time where I think that they did have their sound. There was a time,
yes,
especially before Live was sample accurate, or
yes,
before FL Studio was sample accurate. You know, when, you know, Mark of the Unicorn, I remember using Motu Digital Performer because it sounded so different. And it sounded different because of the timing of MIDI, as well as how it was tracking
you know
audio.
what? You know what? 10 years ago, Cubase was sounding more digital, and FL Studio was sounding more analog. That was the difference. But right now, if anyone says, I did it with this digital audio workstation, actually, I did it with Cubase, or I did it with Ableton, you can't understand it.
That's correct. That's correct. It's all a matter of preference and workflow. It's a matter of what works best for you. Ultimately, all workstations can do the same thing. Now, some of them have different workflows. Things like FL Studio or things like Ableton might be easier for some electronic music producers, such as myself, to get a groove going, to get, you know, something quickly, right, that they can then expand upon in a traditional arrangement. And I think that that is sort of the difference between workstations, is what your workflow is, what you prefer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the viewers said, if the listener is also a producer, maybe it's not impossible to differentiate the audio. No, what I will say is, personally, I can't understand it. What do you say?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that there's such a big difference in sound
impossible.
There's such a difference in sound cards in terms of how they, you know, I think
yes,
the difference between a Focusrite and an Apollo and an Apogee is easier to hear than the difference between any DAW. I think that at this point, the DAW is completely transparent and secondary in the production process. And, you know, as far as, you know, making sure that you have the highest quality, it's a matter of knowing how to, or, you know, getting the equipment to encode analog to digital signal when you're doing things like recording synthesizers or voices and so on, right? I think that the real, the difference in quality is going to be how you record it, not the software you use to record it.
It's not like microphones, you know, like digital microphones or other ones, you know. It's not like that.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Or even audio cards, which I think is a lot more subtle than microphones. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, these days, personally, by the way, I'm using a modeling microphone. They have a few different microphones that have hit the markets recently that can model.
Slate one?
I'm sorry, one more time?
Slate's modeling.
I do have, well, if we're gonna, if we want to do a small studio tour, I do, let me see if I can unplug one of these. I do have a Slate ML1, and I use this for a small condenser. And this is basically like a small pattern cardiac condenser. I have a stereo pair of these.
Yes, it's modeling the other microphones, right?
I'm sorry?
It's modeling the other microphones.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. That's correct. And I use this mostly to record things like, you know, hand percussions and other things, right? So, and then I have a larger modeling mic, and that's for vocalists, right? Because your vocalists are going to not necessarily match with the same mic, right? You might have an investment in microphones. You might have 4 or 5 or 6 great microphones, and then have a vocalist come over, and that microphone won't really match with that vocalist. And so I find it really, really helpful to have modeling mics for that as well. So Slate does make a model. I believe Antares Audio also makes one. I have a Townsend Labs. That's what I've been using.
We were just actually a month ago talking with my vocalist Meriç about these microphones from Slate. modeling other microphones.
Yeah.
And you just confirmed it works.
Yeah, well, so the slate, if we're gonna go for gear reviews here, there's a couple reasons that I went with the Townsend Labs over the slate. Long story short, it has to do with the off-axis response. And once you start twisting the mic, how that mic model responds to it, I just thought the Townsend Labs was a bit of a stronger piece. But
so you are happy with the slate ones?
With the Slate ML2, the small ones, these are great. This is fantastic, and they're not that expensive. At least here in the States, they can model any small diaphragm mic. It's an incredible stereo pair to have. Yeah, absolutely. I'm super happy with them. They're fantastic. Yeah.
So what you say is, it's giving the same feeling like a NOAM proper condenser microphone.
Well, I'm not sure there's any NOAM models on this one. The models for this one are more like small diaphragm, models. Although they do have a couple of radio mics that they've made for this. Yeah, the Townsend Labs that I have is absolutely bananas. It's incredible. Yeah, the large diaphragm, I swear by that one.
So what I will say is, you heard it, people. NOAM Rubinstein approved the Slate's latest microphone application with its microphone. So,
yeah, sure. I mean, I personally love having microphones that small stereo pair is great just to be able to play things like percussions and things like hand drums. If you have a guitar, if you have an acoustic bass, if you want to mic a cabinet, I think that those are great mics to have. Not necessarily for vocals, but those are definitely great mics to have.
You know what? I've seen some situations, even a low quality, like a Behringer. You know Behringers?
Mm-hmm.
Behringer's microphone sounding better than a condenser microphone.
Yeah, look, I mean, it depends on
it's all about the vocalist, I think.
Sure, and it also depends on what kind of vocal you want.
He knows how to play.
Yeah, it also depends on the kind of recording you're going for, what the feel is. If you want something to sound like it's recorded in the bathroom in a club, through distortion, doesn't matter what mic you use. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it is, a lot of music production, I think, is using the tools that you have to the best of their sound, right? And you can, have things that sound at their best better than other more expensive gears that would try to emulate that sound. I mean, how else would I put it? That I could have, a sound coming from, an inexpensive used, $200 digital synth that maybe a very expensive digital synth would have a hard time reproducing, because that's what that little synth does well. So I think that a lot of music production is finding the sweet spot of your gears and what they do well, and how and where they sound best, and really taking advantage of that. And capturing that moment where lightning, hits a bottle, or if you find it by mistake, knowing to keep that mistake and to try to get that back again. I think a lot of it is really finding the sweet spot of what you have, rather than going for, the best, most expensivest, gear that's out there.
There is no there is no proper solution to that expensive gear thing. If you bought an expensive microphone, there is always an expensive one.
Yeah, of course. And now the thing with microphones that's very important to understand is that not every microphone matches with every vocalist, right? So you can you can spend $20,000 US on a Telefunken microphone that won't work with the next 3 vocalists that you work with. So microphones very specifically are very tricky, because even the expensive ones don't work with every vocalist. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So microphones is one of the, I'd say that's probably the biggest category where more expensive doesn't necessarily mean better in every application. Just to throw that out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
in that point, it doesn't mean that more expensive. Actually, it's the same in music business. I will go back to what I say. I will go
Okay.
back to this record. This record.
Okay.
It's done with the most cheapest sound card ever.
Yeah.
It was trash. And computer was beyond trash. But it's done because I want to do it.
Yeah.
The music thing is like this. If you want to do it really from the heart, you can do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The gear that you have, and I know this sounds easy to say for someone that has a ton of gear, but I'm going to agree with you completely that the most important thing is an idea, right? The most important thing is having something to say. The most important thing is, you know, having something to contribute, having something to add to the conversation. And it doesn't matter the gear that you use to do it. If the work is valid, then the work is valid. And it doesn't matter if you use, you know, a Focusrite or a 20-year-old Motu or, you know, a brand new Apollo 8P. It's, you know, if you have something to say, it'll come through in that recording, and that's what makes it dope. That's correct. The how fancy the gear is that you use to make it does not make it dope. And that's I firmly believe that. Absolutely.
You know what? I have a sound card here. It has 10 channels, 10 separate channels. I can record 10 channels with this sound card. I got it from when I got to Amsterdam Dance Event 3 or 4 years ago. The thing is, I never use the channels other than the 2 stereo one until now. The thing is, it will be same for many people because we finish most of the tracks in an digital audio workstation. So it's bouncing out a stereo file, and so we don't need any other channels.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it depends on how you work, right? I mean, some people have synthesizers that accept audio inputs, so maybe it's nice to, you know, filter with the synth and then come back in and hear it in the monitors. There's others. There's definitely workflows that are that.
No, I have a question for you.
Yeah. But to your point, I'm sorry.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, sure, shoot.
Can you differentiate a 909 kick, an analog one, or from a digital audio workstation, or a bass?
Well, yeah, that's
not with, you know.
Yeah, I mean, well, once you add compression to it and EQ to it, I mean, it sort of doesn't. It's not really that same 909 sample anymore, is it?
Yes.
You know, so once that machine comes in the digital that DAW, you start to process it, right? I mean, you're basically at the same point that a sample CD that sampled that. Yeah. Now the trick to it, the trick to those Roland gears is that they had knobs on them for tone, right? So so it's not just the kick, but it's where that knob was when you hit it and sampled it. And then you have, you know, bunches of other sort of variables. But, you know, I think the more important thing is the kind of tone that you're getting versus how classic the tone is that you're getting. Look, I got to be honest with you. I'm super sick of 909, you know, open hats, and super sick of 808 long kicks. And, you know, I think that there's other sounds in the world that can be used. There's on one side, sure, they're familiar, okay, and that makes, you know, your track sort of, you know, interesting. But really, let's call a spade a spade. You know, there's other companies that have made drum synths, and there's other drums that are out there besides these 2 units that were made 40 years ago. Personally,
other open hi-hats.
Yeah, there's other open hi-hats. I mean, personally, in my studio, you know, we like to use things like tambourines. We like to use, right? We like to use actual, you know, actual drum sounds and actual sort of, you know, hand percussion, because we think that that's very interesting. Sure, the drum machines are interesting and people are used to hearing them, but yeah, I think that you have a much wider sonic palette when you start to consider every other instrument that's out there. Yeah. Yeah.
But not 909 drums. Seems like you're fed up.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I'm not fed up, and it depends on the 909 drum, I might add, but yeah, I mean, there's certain ones that are so cliche at this point. It's like, you know, it's almost like using it indicates a lack of creativity.
Actually, I'm not a fan of 909 drums, but I like the open hi-hats.
Oh, I love open hi-hats too, don't get me wrong. And actually, that 909 hat by itself is one thing. I guess if you're pitching it and layering it with other things, you know, but that's the other key to drums, man, is and that's, you know, I'll say for the people coming on, just don't think that one drum sound is enough. Just remember that, you know, in the records that you love, there's different samples playing different parts of each envelope and, you know, different parts of the tone range. And so, you know, remember to layer your drums, gang.
Yeah. For me, personally, what I think is in dance music, most important foundation is the drums, because it's the thing make you dance, you know.
Yeah, well,
that's why New
I
York
think the
house
most
music
important thing is the vibe. The drums, I think, play into the vibe, and the groove, the rhythm, is with the heart of the vibe. Yeah,
S-shaking groove, you know.
Yeah.
It's S-shaking thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And and to that end, I'll get my drums from anywhere. You know, I'll download sample packs, I'll rip things off of old records and sort of, you know, layer them and cut them up and, you know, and do things to them. But yeah, but, you know, playing with a groove and getting it to pop, I think that's probably in a dance record the most important thing. You know, the kick bass combination and how rhythmically sort of, you know, things interact with each other. And yeah, when you're talking about tribal music, you know, the drums are the backbone of all that, of course. Yeah.
You know what? Because I'm a tribal guy, you know.
Exactly.
I'm a proper tribal guy, you know. That's I think we are ending our session. It's 11:30, 11:20.
Okay. Well, that went by quickly.
1 hour. And what I want to say is thank you for joining our session. And people can watch our session in my YouTube channel. We will post it on Monday. And one more thing, tomorrow I'll make a live session DJ set from the studio, and
nice.
I'm expecting everyone to join, including you.
Yeah, I'll be there. Absolutely, I'll be there. I'll be there with my pom-poms on. Mert, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real thrill, real pleasure. You know, great speaking with you, and great to meet all the folks here on the chat.
Have a good time.
All right, thank you, man. Yes, you too. And kick ass on your set tomorrow. I'll be there.